It's February 27th, 2026, and the world feels more unpredictable than ever before. In times like these, the U.S. being $38 trillion in debt, regime changes, artificial intelligence, building resilient family legacies, and generational wealth is key if you want to escape the matrix. Today, I'm with John Knowlton, a former $1 billion wealth firm co-founder, author of Thinking for Success, and expert in shared governance models that keep families strong across generations. John, it's great to have you today.
Hey, thank you, Brendan. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah, so tell us your story a little bit and where you started, how you kind of started out.
Yeah, well, I've been a dual career guy my whole career as an adult, a part-time pastor and a full-time business guy. And as you mentioned, I did co-found a number of registered investment advisors, wealth management firms, and the last one did pretty well. And my personal goal had been to get to $1 billion of client assets, and in 2020 we were at $1.25 billion. And my wife was asking for a little help at home. We'd hit my business goal, and so I exercised an option to exit and sell my share of the business to my partners.
Oh, that's excellent. What really got you started in private equity and this kind of business and things like this?
Yeah, so I wasn't doing private equity. I was advising families with mostly public markets. So I do financial planning and then buy stocks and bonds and things like that for them. Yeah. So that what got me into it. I needed a job in the 90s. I had left a full-time job as a pastor and needed work, and was back to painting apartment buildings, to buy groceries. And my mom sent me a recruiting VHS tape from one of the financial planning firms, and I watched it and I applied, and they didn't hire me, but the process got me interested in the field. So anyways, I found my way into the business, and started with a phone. We didn't have computers on our desks. It was literally paper leads or the phone book, and just dialing to try to get somebody willing to talk about money, and built it from there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you think is the best advice you would give most entrepreneurs really starting out and really trying to do what you're doing?
Yeah, the number one thing for business, in my opinion, is to seek to provide value. If you can find somebody's problem and be a solution, then that's going to add value to their life. And just the way the world works, when we provide value, we receive value in return. So, sometimes we focus on our work or our offering or right. When we start with then we're not thinking about the customer, the client. And so I would just encourage everybody to think about the client. Start with what do they need, and then find a way to meet their need.
I definitely think that's good advice. What do you think was one of the hardest parts about growing a billion-dollar wealth firm? I mean, that's a lot. It's a lot of. It's not just a lot of knowledge. It's actually a lot of. It's an entire scale, right? You have to really know the process of business, and you have to know how to make it through the hard times and actually be able to, again, at that level of scale. So tell us about how you did that and kind of what the best strategies were for you that worked.
Yeah, you asked about what was hard about it. So 2008 and 9 were really hard. That was the global financial crisis. In June of that year, my partner and I had signed a contract to build an office building, and then essentially the wheels of finance fell off, and things came to a grinding halt. So our revenue dropped about 40% that year. That was a tough time. But managing a shrinking business is a problem. Managing one that's growing really fast is a problem too. It's a challenge. And so in 2014, we were at 125 million. In 2020, we were at $1.25 billion. That's 10x. And actually from 14 to 15, we hardly grew at all. And so it was this very fast. We really kind of figured out M&A, mergers and acquisitions. That was my responsibility. And we grew faster than our systems and our processes and our people grew. And so, there's things to be learned when times are tough. There's things to be learned when you're growing fast. But I would say it's super important to invest in your people, to be really clear, to make sure that they understand what success looks like, and in their role, what does it mean to win, and so that they can be pushing towards success independently, and they don't need to ask you all the time for, am I on the right track or not? Make the goal super clear. This is what it looks like for you to win in your role, and then they can go to town.
When you look at everything happening today with the housing market, and you mentioned 2008, 2009, it made me think of the movie The Big Short, right? And everything that happened with that. And it reminds me of today, right? 2026, where I think we're seeing something similar. I wouldn't say it's the same thing, but it's something similar. What would you describe America is going through today? And does it have any similarity to the 2008 housing market crisis, or just the financial situation in itself?
Yeah, well, you're always prepared to fight the last war, and the next one is different. So this scenario seems a lot different to me than 2008 and 9, where we had this huge bubble in mostly residential real estate, driven by super easy capital. And I don't see that right now. We had the huge influx of cash and money printing in response to COVID, which drove prices up generally. I don't think it's specific to one industry in the same way that it was in 2008. In terms of the stock market, it feels a little bit more like, and looks a little bit more like 2000 to me, where we had the dot-com bubble, where price to earnings ratios on publicly traded stocks, tech stocks specifically, went crazy. And we're seeing those kinds of really big valuations right now as well. So I'm not currently adding to my stock portfolio. I'm diversifying into some smaller and private businesses, some startups that I'm consulting with. I'm actually taking ownership stakes, and adding real estate. So in the Midwest, and where the prices are lower, buy and hold, long-term rentals. And then in markets where it's more expensive, then I'm doing value add work, building ADUs, accessory dwelling units, a second unit on the same piece of property on the West Coast. So I kind of answered a lot of questions. I don't know if it was the one you asked, Brendan.
Oh, no problem at all. Yes, I love to hear it, because it can go any ways, right? There's finance. That's why I love finance, is because, like physics, the difference between physics and finance, right? Like physics, there's like an exact formula to it. When it comes to finance, there's not really an exact formula in any which way of which you can go. There's pretty much endless possibilities and outcomes, versus physics, sure, where it's like there's this perfect formula to really find the answer. Right. So when it comes to people giving an answers, especially entrepreneurs like yourself, I love to hear it. It definitely adds the punch. So what do you think about crypto as you're bringing up the new markets and emerging markets? How do you feel about like Bitcoin, right? Like there was the big Jane Street scandal, and there was also with Anthropic and Claude just over the past few days. How do you feel about some of these newer markets? Because it does feel like the dot-com boom for sure. I would definitely agree on that. So and it makes me think of crypto when you say that.
Yeah, so I think you brought up a couple of topics that I'll pull out of there. One is AI, where we're making this massive investment into chips and GPUs and data centers, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars that the hyperscalers, is what they call them, Microsoft, Amazon, some of the companies you just named, are just dumping tons of money into this infrastructure for the new technology. It reminds me a little bit of the automobile industry in the 1920s. There were 800 car manufacturers in the 1920s, and there's 20 years later there was a handful. And so they're building out this infrastructure, but we don't know who's going to be the winner and exactly where the productivity gains are going to land and all that. So it's a little bit Wild Westy, and it's a little pricey. So, but NVIDIA announced better than expected earnings yesterday or the day before, and the stock went down 5 or 6 or 7%. It's like they said, we think our earnings are going to be here. They came in here and the market was disappointed. That's the sign of an unrealistic or a market that's maybe getting out over its skis a little bit. Back to crypto though, I don't understand it. So I have wanted to understand it, and I think there's utility in the blockchain, but I cannot understand why Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana or any other one goes up or goes down in any given, market cycle. I bought a portfolio of those three and watched it for 2 or 3 years, trying to correlate. Okay, is this related to GDP prints? Is it related to interest rates? Is it related to the stock market? Is it related? I could find no correlations at all. And it's a market that doesn't require disclosures. Like, we don't know who's buying it. We don't know who's selling it. We don't know who's making it. Right? All those, there's just lots of mystery. And personally, for me, one of my rules if it's not understandable, it's not investable. So I think I have a tiny little position in Bitcoin that is left over from, I didn't sell all the position or something like that when I placed a trade. So I think there's probably utility there. We just don't quite know what it is. And I don't know what drives the market to go up or down. 3 months ago, Bitcoin was 120,000, or 2 months ago, and now it's 60,000. Why? I don't know.
I think a lot of it has to do with market manipulation, and because it's such a new market, I think there's a lot of that. But I also think there's utility, right? There's the question of, does Bitcoin really have utility, right? Is it able to do cross-border payments and all these things that are pretty powerful with some of these other companies? And so with somebody who's a financial expert like yourself, what do you think somebody should really focus on at a foundational level then? If not crypto, what should they really focus on putting their portfolio? I mean, obviously diversification is, the best strategy probably, right? But what would you say?
Well, the best strategy would be to buy the best performing asset before it's the best performing asset. But we don't know what that's going to be, right? So at the end of 2025, I can look back and say, boy, I should have bought this in January. But we can't know that. And so that's why diversification makes sense, because if you're spread across lots of different asset classes, then you have the best opportunity for something to win. I did, mentioned that US stock prices are looking pretty expensive. And so I'm not adding a lot. Although if I was, I would probably be buying small cap value. Small cap value, that's companies that are sort of up and coming, and they have a lower price to earnings and a lower price to book ratio, which means that if that management team is successful, something's going to go up. Probably the price, the stock itself is going to get more valuable. And then there's room for that price to go up, and then your price to earnings ratio will expand. Ultimately, you want to buy small cap value stocks, companies that are going to move out of your market, right? They're going to move up because they're going to get better and bigger. That's what I would be buying if I was adding right now as a general principle. I mentioned earlier, I'm liking real estate. Interest rates have been coming down a little bit at the beginning of 25. 30-year mortgages were 7-ish%. We're now averaging around 6 and maybe a little below. And so that's pretty interesting and attractive. Demographically, we still have a growing population that'll continue for the next 6 or 7 years. I think at 2031, we're projected to start to shrink a little bit, but we still have a big backlog of millions of homes that didn't get bought. There's family formation. The number of people who want a house is greater than the number of new housing units coming on board. And we have somewhere between 250,000 and 400,000 housing units a year that are obsolete, or they're demolished, or whatever the case. So I still think there's good money to be made in residential real estate, though it's not 2021. You can't just buy anything and expect to make a bunch of money. But if you can buy smart, which I just bought an 8-unit for about 35% below asking, because I was able to make the deal. They'd had a previous deal that fell through. It was hard for their people to get financing or whatever. Come in and buy that thing and stabilize it, put a little money into it, get the rents up to where they should be. And gosh, you can make money in a market that people are saying is a tough market, because if you can buy it right.
Yes, and I say that as a realtor myself. I definitely agree with that. I think when it comes to difficult markets, what makes them difficult, one, is the psychology of it, right? The mental frameworks that people are kind of thrown into through FUD and news and media and all these things. It definitely plays into factor. It leaves you that audience that says, "Well, this is too hard. I'm not investing." So there's those people who really never do extra research. They don't make the extra phone calls, right? They don't call their realtor. They don't call their finance guy. They don't call their John Knowlton. And I think, that's the important part of really this industry, whether it's real estate or whether it's business, whether it's AI, especially anything on the cutting edge of things, right? I think that's important, everything that you had just said. What would be your best advice to entrepreneurs? And like, what do you think is coming in the future for entrepreneurs? Kind of two questions there.
Wow. Well, I have a question, which is, why don't realtors call people back?
I think it's
Hey,
because
I'm a
realtors
cash
get
buyer
lazy.
investor. I'm looking at one of your listings. Please call me.
Yeah, I think it's because realtors get lazy. Some realtors, I think there's a real study. I think, I have heard a lot of studies that, most people are extroverted. I don't believe that. I think, and including most entrepreneurs, I just don't believe it. I think when people take the tests, I think they say that they're extroverted and things like that, whatever personality test, right, that they're using the census from. So when I think about realtors and why people, or just entrepreneurs in general, why entrepreneurs don't answer the phone, why they don't, get on the phone, I think it really, it's an element of fear, lack of experience, and then I think a little bit of laziness as well. I think it's all of those things combined. That would be my theory on it, because I try to look at myself, and it's like when I slack, whenever I slack with clients, whenever sometimes like I may not get back with them right away, I'm like, okay, those are some of the problems that come up with me. And then I look around and I see like the other agents who are doing much worse. And again, I'm pretty new, so I mean, I'm still learning, but I see agents who do a little bit worse just based on, their level of aggression, in the industry and all of those things. I mean, it's passion, it's everything. I think all of those things come into play,
Sure.
right?
Well, you asked me a question, so I'll do the honor now of answering it. So I think one was what's coming, and then the other piece of the question was kind of what should we do, or advice to entrepreneurs. So what do I think is coming? I think increased depersonalization. In other words, as we put more and more technology into our lives, AI agents and just the increased amount of technology, there's less and less need for personal contact. I've bought last year. I sold 3 houses and bought 2 of them. I just did a closing this week. I went in person to one of them. So everything else I just closed virtually, man. There's less and less human contact, which makes an opportunity for us. If we can get really good, even if we're not extroverts, but really good at providing something that a technology layer can't. Emotional connection, being real, being authentic. As there's more and more fakes and less trust online, the ability to be authentic and real is a key differentiator. It's a big deal. So we can bemoan it and complain about it, or we can take advantage of the opportunity. So there's a story of the 2 shoe salesmen back in the colonial times. And there was 2 shoe salesmen that were sent by steamboat back in that era to a colony from Europe. And their job was to go assess the market for shoes. And the first guy gets off the boat and looks around, and he sends a telegram back. He says, "I'm coming home. Nobody here wears shoes." The second guy gets off the boat, looks around, and sends a telegram. He says, "Send me everything you've got. No one here has shoes yet." Same market, if you will, same circumstances, different mindset. Are we seeing an opportunity, or are we seeing that, the world is closed to us? So I really like people to think about an abundance mindset, to think of a resource-rich environment. And so as the technology and AI and everything else changes the field, realize that your ability to be your authentic self as a human being, interacting with human beings, is a huge opportunity for you. Now, the second thing I was going to say is do what you say you're going to do. It sounds very simple and almost trite, but it is a differentiator. It's different than lots of people who don't show up when they say they will. They don't reply when they say they will. People love responsiveness. Why do they hate the cable company? Because they'll be there between 10 o'clock and next Thursday, right? They're not responsive. If you do what you say you're going to do, you'll stand out and you'll succeed.
I think those are all great answers. And I think it's very true. I think, especially when it comes to the future, the best way to handle the future is to have agency, to take charge, to take initiative, and to get out of your comfort zone. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an introvert, but I'm definitely a little bit I would say I'm more of a mix, right? I kind of like my alone time. Obviously, I like that time to work and focus, but I like being an extrovert. And I think part of the process of being successful in entrepreneurship, a large part of that is being able to adapt and endure, right? To handle the unpredictable twists of fate, to kind of take control over those things. Initiative, like you were saying, right? So I think one of the bigger ways for entrepreneurs to handle the future, like you said, is to connect with human beings more, to become more authentic, to become more real. So I think that's, and you definitely see it. The greatest personalities today are very, whoever it is, whoever your favorite personality is, whoever's watching right now, you think about those people and you definitely connect with that. You resonate with those people who are authentic. You can you can connect to them. You kind of sit back and you say, he's right. Or you sit back and say, oh, I really agree with that. I understand this guy. And it's like a breath of fresh air, so I definitely think everything you said there is true. When it comes to entrepreneurs working on newer projects, like kind of what you're working on, right? Like talk about your book a little bit and your process doing that, and what are entrepreneurs to do if they want to write their own book.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I wrote a book called Thinking for Success. And in fact, there's a picture of it right behind me on the wall there. And I didn't set out to write a book. I was running a business and noticed that my people would keep coming to me with questions or problems. And my first response was to solve their problem and answer their question. And then I realized I was making them dependent on me so that I couldn't do my work because I was solving their problems. So then I said, oh, you know what? I need to give them a principle and sort of a theory that they can use, which I did. And then realized people have a hard time connecting a theory to their particular circumstance. And then I stumbled on this truth that people connect really well with stories. Jesus was maybe the greatest storyteller of all time. He told parables. And so I would tell a story in a staff meeting and then invite everybody to talk about it. Have they seen that type thing happen? And in their experience and things like that. And then we would boil it down to like a moral of the story, a sentence or two that captured what that story was about. And I found that when people had stories, they could connect the story to their lives and their work, and their thinking improved and they were able to solve their own problems and whatnot. And so over time, I said, gosh, I'm not that smart. I'm going to forget these stories. So I would just write them down out of self-preservation. And over the years, Brendan, I got to have 40 stories. And I said, gosh, if I had 52, then I'd have one a week for a staff meeting for the whole year. And so I kept writing and I got to 70 stories, and then hired an editor to pick the best 52 and present, clean them up for me. And so that was the genesis of the book, Thinking for Success. And my thesis is that all of our outcomes are based on our behavior, which is all rooted in how we think. And so if we can think better, then we're going to have better outcomes and higher level of success. Now, if somebody wants to write a book, different people approach the writing process differently. For me, it's important to have dedicated time in my calendar. I have 3 writing blocks a week, 3 90-minute blocks. So I know, and they're first thing in the day so that nothing can kind of take over. And then I find that I can talk through an idea, and that helps me write better. So I go on podcasts and talk to people like Brendan in order to sharpen my thinking. And then that makes the writing process easier once I've had a chance to articulate it out loud and respond to questions and whatnot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I wrote a couple, like my books, Beyond the Beat, How I Made My Door in My Office. I mean, they were just kind of books I wrote in college, so to speak. And then, when I became a cop, obviously, kind of talking about my experiences doing those things. But I definitely had the same experience. What I liked about writing the book is it's really just your thoughts. You're just documenting your thoughts, your thought structure in many ways. That's why I love reading. That's why I love books. I got a whole library just full of them. I get super, I'm kind of, it's one of the bigger problems I had when I was younger is I'd read too much and I wouldn't, I wouldn't go and apply this knowledge. Right. And so that's also really important, I feel like. And so, where can we find your book? I'm definitely going to read it. I think it sounds interesting.
Well, thanks, man. So, that's one reason I wrote this book the way I did. It's like 52 two-page chapters. And if you read one a week, it'll take you a year to read the book, but it gives you time to try to apply. Here's one about creativity. Let me practice. I've got a week to try it before I get to the next one. And so if you got 5 good ideas out of my 52 and you changed your approach to problem solving or your productivity or how you get along with people 5 different ways, my gosh, your life will be a lot better. If you get better, a little bit at a time and you apply that, amortize that over the rest of your career or life. It's amazing. So the book is available anywhere books are sold, online, such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, etc. So it's Thinking for Success. And my name's John Knowlton. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a million. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check that out. What do you think is the most important advice for authors and really, getting in that process of writing their first book, getting in the mental frameworks, right? Kind of like we were talking about a little bit. What was the biggest thing that you had to persist through when writing the book, when finishing it, staying on top of things, right?
Yeah. So it's just it's the distraction. And in other words, when you're dedicated 90 minutes to write, it's really easy to do everything except write. And so I have to leave my phone in another room, and have no browser windows open or anything like that. Just focus on the writing. And so it takes some dedication and discipline really to do that. And for some people, it might be important to develop a reward. If you like some food you like, hey, you can have 10 M&Ms if you write for an hour, something like that. Just build your little tricks in to help keep you focused on the task at hand. And then the second thing that was hard for me was when I sent my work off to be edited, and then it comes back and they do this track changes where they can see everything that they've scratched out and how they replaced it. And that's in red. And I open it up and it's like the Red Sea, man. It's like a red pot of ink exploded over the screen. And the first time I got that kind of stuff back, I'm reading all their notes and I'm like, arguing with them and stuff like this. And then I just smacked myself in the head and said, you know what? I'm paying these people real money. They've edited 5 million words, they say, and they probably know what they're doing. So I just basically from then on, I went to accept all changes. It was like, all right, trust the people they hire to be good at their job.
Who are some of your greatest inspirations on your way to success in writing and entrepreneurship, all of it? Because you seem to have a wide range of knowledge. I take you as a Warren Buffett kind of guy for sure. You strike me as that. So who are some of your greatest inspirations in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, Warren is a real inspiration for a number of reasons. One, he's a great investor. I think he's a great writer. I love reading the letter to shareholders that he produced every year. Came out in the spring, most years, and he was very productive late into his life. Into his late 80s, and so I love that about Warren Buffett. The reality is we can learn from those type people, super famous people for sure. We actually there's People that are closer to us have more influence on us, though. And so I think we can learn from almost anybody. If you have a terrible boss, you can learn from that boss how to not be a boss. And if you've got somebody who just runs meetings really well, learn from them how to run a meeting. Maybe they're bad at sales or bad at HR or whatever, but take the thing that they're really good at and internalize that. And you can learn from everybody you interact with. Sometimes I'll go to a store, getting coffee, and the person taking your money or taking your order will just be really good at their job. And when you have those experiences where you smile or you think, man, I'm glad I came here, you got something to learn from that person. So I just encourage you, sure, follow the famous people, but there's genius all around us. The world is rich with people who are amazing at something, and seek to get the best that you can from just the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Abraham Lincoln said it, learn from everyone. There's something to learn from everyone. And I really believe that, even when, and especially, I try to push this message with anybody who's like really into politics, because I'm into politics, but I also think an art form is being able to understand both sides, right? Whether it's left, right, any of those issues, what's the more important issue is almost the truth, right? And trying to find what that truth is, what it even means, right? These questions to me are more deep. And, when it comes to entrepreneurship, especially, the difference between politics and business, and kind of the reason I love business, is because you can control the world a little bit more. You do have a little bit more agency. You can really shift the tides. You can take initiative on the future. And that's really cool to me. Like I see that a lot today. One of the biggest things I see is, well, the economy's terrible and it's really hard. Your business is too hard. And it's like, it is. But it's like, at the same time, I feel I don't know if you feel the same thing, but there really is like a rush, like there really is like an adrenaline rush behind that experience of really building something that's your own, and taking charge on those things. So whether it's a business, entrepreneurship, I just think that's definitely the route people should consider, because again, in a time where we have recessions, we have all these different factors in the market, real estate market might not be great, well, you can always change it. You could start a new business. You could buy a new business. You could buy stakes in businesses like you're doing. So what would you say is your last bit of good advice for the audience, wrapping things up here?
Well, I want to riff on something you said about agency. Yeah. So, we can complain about foreign policy, but unless we're going to become Secretary of State or become a senator and get on the Foreign Relations Committee, there's not a lot we can do about that. The chapter 19 in my book is called Proximity is Influence. And proximity is just a fancy word for being near something or being close to something. And so we have the only thing we have control over is ourselves. And then we have influence over things that are close to us, like the decisions we make, or the way that we choose to interact in the world, or the things that we're going to invest in, or invest our time in, or invest our attention in. And the gap between what we're concerned about and what we have influence or control over, the bigger that gap, the greater our sense of anxiety. Like if all of my attention goes to foreign policy, but I have no influence over that, I'm going to have a lot of anxiety. Whereas if I put my attention on, making the next sales call, I can control that. I can't control what they say, but I can control whether I pick up the phone and dial, or stop at the next door and knock on it and seek to add value to somebody. Excuse me. And so the closer our attention and concern is to our actions, the much more agency we're going to feel, and the much more influence we're going to have on the outcomes of our life.
I love that. I think that's great advice. John, I appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have you on again. I thank you for coming on the show. I know we didn't record the last time. What's funny is I did have it on automatically record. I remember setting it to that, but maybe I just set it for another guest. I had like 6 guests. There's my excuse. I know, no excuses, but that was my excuse. So
happy to chat anytime,
up,
Brendan.
where can people follow you on social media? And just one more time, where can people find your book, Thinking for Success?
Yeah, probably the best way to follow what we're doing. My wife and I have a company called Abundant Thought Revolution. So abundantthoughtrevolution.com. We post insights multiple times a week, little videos, ideas, plus fun, cool stuff we do. We do rock climbing and camping and adventuring and things like that. So abundantthoughtrevolution.com and Abundant Thought Revolution on all the socials. And then the book's available online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or ask at your local bookstore.
All right. Thanks a million, John. Thanks for coming on the show. You've been a great guest. It'll be great for the audience, and I'll get with you on logistics and distribution and all that stuff with the episode. Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, man.
Thank you. You have a good rest of your day.
Yeah. Bye now.